Welcome to another edition of Journey of Hope. Thrilling stories of people who have confronted crises, a medical crisis, a traumatic injury, cancer, and have been impacted by the healing ministry of Loma Medical Center. Our special guest today is Jim Tuggy, Colonel Jim Tuggy, retired, from Trophy, Texas. Trophy is near Dallas. Jim, I want to welcome you to our program here and want to learn a little bit about your background. I know you have a thrilling story, been around the world, and like to have you, share with me and the audience here a little bit about your background, where you came from, and then going into the service. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I came from Harlingen, Texas. This is a small town down in the Rio Grande Valley, and basically my family had gone down there to run a fruit ranch, and we eventually moved up to Michigan, but my birth was in Texas, and my beginnings were really with a family that was musically inclined. My mother taught music. My dad was a good enough tenor that the Metropolitan Opera wanted him, and then my sisters came along, and that's how we started. And in that period, I met the love of my life, Janet, and we were married in 1953, which will mean 54 years shortly. And that's how we started out. I joined the Army, of course, out of Tucson, Arizona. I was 18 years old, nothing to do, so off I went. And I went to Fort Ord, California, right near here, and took my basic training. Somewhere along the line, the Korean War started. And
you were in the military at this point.
I was in the military. I'd already, so they said, well, you've got the record, so we'll send you to Officers Candidate School. So I went to Fort Riley, got my commission. To make a long story short, went through the Korean War in pretty good shape. And came back to the United States, basically, not really sure what I was going to do, but I ended up going into the flying business and the flight school. And I discovered that I was a very good maintenance logistician. And that's what I did, basically.
In the military?
In the military, yes.
Okay. All right. Well, we've got a couple of pictures here we want to take a look at.
All right.
You can comment on them as we kind of move through them, and kind of tells a story here.
Well, this is a picture of the first helicopter company that I commanded. This was at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. And it's interesting in this picture that you have two Canadian exchange officers in this picture. This was a direct involvement where they commanded a platoon in my company.
In your company, all right.
And we had people up in Canada doing the same thing. So that's how we started out. And we trained at Fort Sill, and that company eventually moved to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and then from there to Germany.
Okay. We'll just kind of move from one
Sure.
another, and you can comment on them here as we go along.
About that time, there's a picture of my family. I have three sons. This was taken about 1960, I believe. My wife and the three boys. That's Matthew, Timothy, and what have you. And this is and James Andrew. And this is me in Vietnam, standing next to the helicopter that I flew. I was in the Army research, so they did all kinds of strange things and put weapons and systems on that helicopter for me to test. This is a U-6 in a rainy day at the Saigon airport.
Another rainy day.
And this was an interesting aircraft. I did fly some of Mike Wallace's people up for interviews in this aircraft. So I left there and went on to really move back to Corpus Christi, Texas. At Corpus Christi, this picture was taken in 1976 at the 200th anniversary of the United States. And the 76 on the tail boom, and I'm standing up by the pilot's compartment. Now here we go. I finally left there, and you see me over in Iran. This interesting picture, I'm standing where the people are washing carpets that have just been produced, and then drying them on the banks of the hill next to the water pool.
That was their carpet dryer.
Yeah, that's how they did it, and they still today do it that way. And then, of course, Iran ended in a revolution, and this picture is of my window with about 6 bullet holes in it. And I decided to leave at that time since I was not welcome.
Now, this was a personal residence, or where was that?
That was in the Hilton Hotel
In the Hilton
in
Hotel.
Tehran.
Okay.
And then later, my wife and I went over to Sydney. This was a bicentennial air show in Sydney, all accomplished in tents. One of the most interesting shows in our life. And this is in Sydney Harbor, and right behind us is the famous Sydney Opera House.
Okay.
Yeah. This is after we moved to Singapore. I went over there to be the logistician for Bell Helicopter and formed Bell Helicopter in Singapore. And we had, this lady is a lady from China whose father was the president of China under Ting Liu. And this man on the right, Stephen, is a man who interpreted for me in China. And I introduced him to Cecily, the lady he later married, who's in this picture.
So you're kind of responsible for bringing them together,
That's right.
huh?
So my wife Janet and I in London, we had gone over to see our grandson get his semester with Cambridge College as he's on his way to his undergraduate degree. And then later I came back and went to, I was awarded a Distinguished Member of the Regiment Award by the Secretary of the Army, and this is a ceremony we went to at Fort Eustis, Virginia.
Now, this was just recently.
Yeah, this was just a year ago, and this is the certificate that the Secretary of the Army presented to me. And that was very interesting because I got to interview a lot of Iraq returnees, Afghan returnees, men and women, and it was very interesting.
Now, this award that was given to you, Jim, what really was that? What is it? What does it represent?
It represents basically a long period of distinguished service with your regiment, and my regiment happens to be the Transportation Regiment, which is sort of strange because the Transportation Corps at one time had all the helicopters, and whether you know it or not, the Army had the largest fleet of aircraft over the Air Force or anybody else.
Oh, the Army
Had
did?
13,000 aircraft.
I don't think too many people know that.
Yes.
Well, you gave allusion to the fact that your parents and your mother was musical, and it made an impact upon you, and you're part of a singing group. Tell us a little bit about that singing group, because it leads into the story of your cancer.
Well, let me give you a prelude to that. I was in Iran singing in a quartet called the Persian Version, and when we were thrown out in a hail of bullets, I came to Dallas and auditioned for a group called the Vocal Majority. And that year, in '79, we went on to up to Minneapolis to win a gold medal as the best chorus.
So this is a big
Yes.
competition.
Yes, major, including choruses from England and Australia, New Zealand, Germany, everywhere. And that became a very interesting thing in my life, and I started to do that, and resulted really, providentially, as you know, everything happens to us in this business because God guides it some way.
That's right. All things work together for the good of those that love the Lord.
Anyway, I went up to the chorus manager in 1999, and I said, "Steve, I've got prostate cancer. What should I do?"
You went up to your chorus director.
Yeah, the chorus manager.
The chorus manager.
This is a guy who was managing the surgical clinic at Harris Hospital in Fort Worth. And his first words were simple: "Don't have surgery."
Just right there.
Right there. And I said, "Well, that's nice, but what do I do?" I said, "My urologist wants to do that." He said, "Talk to Dr. John Griswold." And I didn't realize that 4 men down from me on my row, there's 150 of us singing together, is a guy named Dr. John Griswold. So I asked him, "John, what should I do about my prostate cancer?"
So he's one of the singing people in this choir of 150 people, and he's
Right.
just down the line from you.
So he says to me, without even inhaling, "Go to Loma Linda." I said, "What's a Loma Linda?"
What is a Loma Linda?
So he explained that to me. And that ended up by me telling my urologist the following Tuesday, "I'm going to do that, but would you please send my papers out to Loma Linda?" And here I am.
That's the first you'd really known about Loma Linda.
And,
did some investigation, and
I just took John's word for it.
And John is a physician. He works
Yes.
at, is it Hughley or?
He works in that area in Fort Worth, but he basically runs all the trauma people
in the
and
ER.
has a history with Loma Linda.
Okay.
So it was very providential that that happened to me, because I just was surprised that he knew about a place I never heard of. And then, of course,
You came to Loma Linda.
you couldn't imagine the treatment at Loma Linda. I've been taking flight physicals my whole life. I've had to take a physical in the Army all my life. And I was never treated like a human being, so to speak, as I was at Loma Linda, where everybody took care to look into what your needs were and to follow up and get something done for you. And it made me very comfortable with the treatment. Everybody that I met, to include my doctor, who was Carl Rossi, and Sharon Hoyle, and those people that worked with me, just kept me really uplifted. So I decided at the end of that year, I graduated from Loma Linda on the 27th of August.
So we consider you an alumnus
yes,
now.
in 1999.
99. 8 years ago.
Yeah, 8 years and 2 months. And I went back and said, I'm going to open a website, and I'm just going to open one to tell people about protons. And it's been open since 99.
Well, Jim, I've heard some thrilling stories of some of the work that you've been doing with this website. And you've opened up the website merely to share with people about proton therapy, and about your experience here at Loma Linda.
Exactly.
And you've been operating this thing now for almost 8 years itself.
Well, late 99.
Late
yeah.
99.
So.
And what kind of work have you been doing in terms of helping people? I mean, what do you have on your website?
Well, nobody can see it, but I will just, I have a chart here that shows that I'm getting from 5,000 to 10,000 hits a day on my website.
Per day?
Per day.
Okay.
This just reflects this last month.
All right.
And that is...
these are inquiries.
These people are taking a page from that website to get a hit. That means they are asking for a page. They are printing a page. And I get calls. I get emails first, and I will go home at any given night, and my wife will say, "Are you coming to bed?" I said I was going to, until I had 3 hits on the site that they want an answer on protons. So I answer those, sometimes till 2 in the morning, whatever it takes. And I do a lot of basic follow-up research. I read everything written by everybody, all the great mainstream medical centers, Harvard Medical Center, Sloan Kettering, Johns Hopkins, Mayo. I read everything they write on prostate treatment, no matter whether it's BHP or anything else. And so as a result, I've probably got 8 feet of notes in my office.
8 feet of notes. You told me you had about 30 notebooks.
Yeah, and it's just
filled with correspondence, and
it's sort of typical of this. This is just pages on protons, and this happens to be a page on a proton center that's going in East Chicago, West Chicago, I mean. And so it's what I do to keep in touch, and it's amazing how fast it's moving. So you have to do that every day. You can't rest on what you said yesterday. You've got to know what's happening today.
Well, I know, some people will spend 15, 20 minutes working with their computer and working on something like this. But I think if I remember correctly, you're spending 2 to 3 hours a day.
I would say roughly 3.
Yeah.
Roughly 3 every day.
And
that goes back, with some exceptions, but that goes back to 99.
Well, I know because of your experience here at Loma Linda, and you're starting this website, you've been writing different letters to different people in government positions and at the up in Washington, D.C. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, in 99, I wrote every congressman, every senator in the United States.
This is right after you returned.
Right after I returned.
You're so excited, you wanted to get the word out.
I wrote every one of them and told them what had happened to me, and I got some responses. I did get some responses from the senators from California. My own senators and congressmen responded, but I got some very interesting ones. John McCain responded. And I got a couple of guys said, "You're not my constituency, go away." So it was sort of interesting. But I did it, repeated 2 years later. I did the same thing.
And what were you sharing with them?
I was sharing with them the fact that this technology was not available to most people without somebody telling them that there was such a thing, because mainstream medicine wasn't. In fact, I just completed reading the report from the American Urological Association that just met in Anaheim, California this year, 2007. They don't even mention the word proton in that report at all. So
there's a number of articles being written, and they'll talk about the different modalities for treatment, and it seems like they do leave out proton.
In fact, I had a lady from Johns Hopkins tell me, well, when that becomes mainstream, and so I say, well, see, that's the difference. Loma Linda believes it's mainstream right now.
Correct.
And Dr. Slater, thank God for him, has made sure that everybody knows that.
Well, some people, I've heard references to the fact that about surgery being the gold standard, and I've heard people commenting, yeah, well, that was in the last century. That was a term coined in the last century. This is the 21st century, and I've heard people referring to proton therapy as the platinum standard.
Without question. I guess my biggest disappointment is when I read that, I just read a report from Johns Hopkins by the two leading surgeons. Of course, Patrick Walsh, of course, started nerve-sparing surgery in --
It's been that long ago.
And so he says, well, there is a difference between experience. And so right away, he's looking at the experience of the surgeon as to whether or not you will succeed. And that doesn't ring well with me, because I don't look at the experience. I look at the system here, and the system will handle you the same way. You may be different. You may have had different physical characteristics. You may have had different problems with your prostate. You could have a lot of other conditions that don't show up on the surface. But the treatment of the prostate is going to be consistent, and it's going to be done with protons, and it's going to cover that prostate, and it's going to take a margin that's sufficient to usually catch anything that goes outside. It won't always succeed, but it will most of the time succeed. Non-invasive, no surgery, no insertion of seeds. So that's a no-brainer to me.
Sure.
You go where you can get the action.
Well, and I need to remind you, as well as the audience here, that we do have a Department of Urology. We have surgery here. We have the Da Vinci method here, and people go through that, and they do have a very successful experience. But you, among a number of others, are discovering proton. And what's been so exciting, Jim, is as I've gotten acquainted with you the last 7 or 8 years, you've taken a very active part in the Proton Advisory, and this website is making a tremendous impact. And I've had some contact with some of the people that you've indirectly been responsible for that are really making a difference, and they're very excited about what they've discovered, and they're making an impact upon the research that's going on here, and want to thank you for that.
Well, I think it's important. In fact, I've got right here a little letter that was delivered by hand to the Texas governor, and that's a letter thanking me from Governor Perry of Texas for telling him about protons.
Well,
so it's working.
This is just a couple of months ago.
Yes.
Yeah, dear Howard, thank you for sending me the great book by Bob Marchini, and that book is
you can cure prostate cancer without surgery, essentially.
You can survive prostate
Yes.
cancer. Yeah, Bob is the founder of the Bob, and he was one of our guests here on Journey of Hope.
Sure.
Thank you for sending me the great books by Bob Marchini. I appreciate your thinking of me and wish you the best for a great 2007. Thanks again for your kindness. Rick Perry, Governor of Texas. Well, you're making contact with all kinds of people. And people like this, you never know. You sow a seed, you never know where it's going
Sure.
to be germinated. Tell us a little bit about your singing and the impact that's making. And I know that as a part of that group, you are sharing about Loma Linda with some of those people.
They all know about Loma Linda. I don't ever hesitate with them. But we are the world champions. We have a mission that we feel, and people come to us as well as they do to their pastor and say, "Your singing healed me." "You Raised Me Up" by Josh Groban. That's the name of one of our albums. And that album alone, that's our 13th one, which 14th one will be come out this
14th
month.
album?
This month, called Believe. It's a new Christmas album. But I believe that emotion there is part of my love for music and love for that group, because we do affect a lot of people with our music. And we sing well. It would be helpful for everybody to listen to that, because it is good stuff.
Yeah, well, I've received a number of those tapes during the last few years, and every year, Christmas time, not only we, but those that are visiting us in our home are able to benefit from the blessing of that program. Tell us a little bit about if you're in a group of people, and we've got an audience watching, and some people have never even heard about being detected for prostate cancer, what would you tell a man what he needs to do?
Well, I tell men this every week, and basically I say to them, you need, above all, the best advice I can give you is get a second opinion from a proton expert, not just another urologist or another oncologist, but from a proton expert that knows the proton. And I said the most experienced people in dealing with prostate cancer right now is Loma University. I have had people say, well, I'm in Jacksonville, Florida. And I said, well, there's a proton center there, and some of those doctors were trained by people at Loma Linda. So you can certainly go there if it's hard for you to get out to Loma Linda. But I find I've got a man coming out here that I recommended. He's coming out on the 26th, and he comes from Atlanta, Georgia. Now, he can go down the road a little ways to Jacksonville, but that's not what he's going to do. He's going to come here because you've got a tremendous experience background here. And I just tell him, I said, look, it's not difficult to understand that we're talking about a non-invasive treatment that's as good or better than any other treatment out there, with a great bonus of no side effects. I said, here I am, almost 78 years old. I was treated 8 years, 2 months ago. I have a PSA of 0.1. Wow. I have no side effects, and my colon guy just said that there isn't any marks on it. So, you know, that's pretty good.
That is great. We have people watching, Jim, believe it or not, that men that are watching, they don't even know what a prostate is, and they don't even know how to be tested. What would you, we're not a physician here, but give them a couple of tips.
You know, it's difficult to, when you have the symptoms that may be prostate cancer, it can often be benign hyperplasia, which means a swollen prostate. But the prostate is difficult to get to. It's a deep organ in a man's body, between his legs, and the surgery is difficult. In fact, in some of the surgeries that I know about, they've had the man donate 5 pints of blood before he started the surgery.
Sure, just a cautionary.
Just as a cautionary thing to make sure he has it. So if you can achieve the same result with lower side effects, why would you have seeds, brachytherapy? Why would you have any other surgery? Robotic surgery is new, maybe wonderful. It does steady the doctor's hand, but it has a track record that's not sufficient yet.
It's still relatively
new. So those, and all the other uses of radiation are X-rays. And folks, X-rays go through your body, period. They can't be stopped. That's why you can see your lungs and your bones and what have you when you have X-rays. Protons don't. They enter your body, 98,000 miles per second, peak on the cancer, kill it, and drop to zero. That's as simple as it is.
So to be tested for it is a simple blood test called the PSA test, when you can very easily have it taken care of. And men need to be doing it on a regular basis, probably once a year after the age of 50. And if there's prostate cancer in the family, it should be more often than that. Now, I know a part of the Proton Advisory Group, they have a special golf tournament once a year to help raise funds for research, and that's part of the role and responsibility of the advisory group. But you were recently involved in the Proton tournament, and I need to give you an opportunity to tell us what happened with the team that you had.
Well, I played with a fellow named John Eben, Bob Marchini, who's the famous author of the book, and a guy named Bob Sewell. And we are the first patient team to beat the doctors.
Well, that is very, very significant. And probably what could be brought out is I played with you the previous 2 years. I didn't play with you that year. The first year I didn't play with you, and it's the first year that you guys won. And I have never been able to live that down. But another day will be coming. There's other tournaments, and I'm forming my own team. And there will be a return, and I will come back. You know, I want to thank you, Jim, for being with us and for sharing, and particularly for this wonderful work you're doing on the website and making an impact. And, you know, to think of 5,000 to 10,000 hits, that's a number of people. And we are having people come here as a result of, you know, the first contact they made was on your website. And it leads to another person making a contact, and then they interview some other patients, former patients, and then they end up coming here. And, you know, lives are being touched and impacted by your work. And I want to thank you for the work that you do on our Proton Advisory, because that's immeasurable. And for the ambassador that you are as you go around, as you continue traveling. For those in our audience here, I want to remind you that being detected for prostate cancer is very easy. And you've heard the story of Jim, who not only found out he had cancer, but came here, was treated, was impacted by the healing ministry of Loma Linda Medical Center, and then has started his own ministry on this website. What is that website?
It's prostateproton.com.
Prostate
Proton, run together.
Prostateproton.com.
Right.
And what do they need to access it?
Just go up and Google it, or put it into the address site up at HTTP.
All right. And again, want to thank you for joining us here, Jim, and for the wonderful work you're doing. We want to thank our audience for joining us on LLBN. I'm Lynn Martell with Loma Linda Medical Center and the Journey of Hope, and we want to welcome you next week to another episode as we allow people to share how Loma Linda has made an impact upon their life. They've gone on to experience hope, healing, happiness, and wholeness.